Regional economic integration. So in this lecture, we look at what are the reasons why individual countries will come together to form larger regional groupings. Groupings like the European Union, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and after the ASEAN Free Trade Area. So why do countries come together? What is the benefit of regional integration? And also the other thing we look at here is the various different levels of integration. And there are 5 basic levels that you'll need to learn, and what distinguishes one level from the next. That's what we look at in this lecture. And in the following lectures, we'll spend some more time on the actual real world groupings. We'll look at the European Union, we'll look at the North American Free Trade Agreement, and we'll look at ASEAN and the ASEAN Free Trade Area in more detail. Okay? So what do we mean by regional economic integration, and what are the different levels? And then what are some benefits and some drawbacks of regional economic integration? These are basically the areas we'll cover in this lecture. So a definition of economic integration can be defined as an agreement among nations to cooperate on economic and trade issues. It's defined as a state of affairs, and it's also defined as a process. So it's a noun and it's also a verb. In terms of state of affairs, it has achieved a position whereby there is an absence of discrimination among member countries. So that's the actual state of affairs. Then in terms of a verb, the ongoing happening, it's in the process of abolishing discrimination among member countries. And then in terms of the number of levels, there are 5 actual different levels or different depths of integration that can be reached. And we're going to look at each one of those in turn. So here's a diagram showing the 5 levels of regional economic integration, a process whereby countries in a geographic region cooperate to either reduce or eliminate barriers to free flow of products, people, or capital. So you can see from the diagram, it's a series of concentric circles, and you actually start from the outer circle and work your way inwards. In other words, the lowest level or the simplest level of integration is the free trade area, and then you move up through the various levels until you come to political union, which is the greatest level of integration. In terms of the various real-world groupings that are shown on this particular graph, the 3 that we'll be interested in are the European Union, EU, NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and AFTA, the ASEAN Free Trade Area. So let's have a look at the next graph, which actually explains this in a slightly more easy to understand way. Okay, this is actually the most important slide in the whole lecture. So if you can understand this one and to some extent memorize this one, you can really answer any question on economic integration and regional integration of countries. So look at this chart. Basically, you can see the 5 levels, and it's building up from the bottom, from free trade area up through customs union, common market, economic and political union. That's why you see the arrow on the right-hand side moving up from the bottom, and you can see the word cumulative in that arrow. What that means is that each level of integration contains everything in the previous level, in the lower level, and then something else to make it what it says. So if you go to level 2, a customs union, it includes everything in free trade area plus something else to make it a customs union. Then if you go to common market, it includes everything in free trade area, everything in customs union, and then something else to make it a common market, etc., all the way up. So what is the something else is basically what you can see there in the description in each box. So a free trade area removes all barriers to trade among members, but each country has their own policies for non-members. So if you think about ASEAN, the 10 countries of ASEAN, that means there's no barriers to trade among the 10 countries of ASEAN: Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Myanmar, etc. All 10 of them. They trade with each other. There are no tariffs. There are no quotas. It's free trade among themselves internally. But once those countries individually trade with any country outside the grouping, like the US, Japan, Australia, China, then each one of those countries is free to set their own level of tariffs in terms of how they interact with countries outside. All right, so that's the free trade area, the simplest level. Then you move up to the customs union, removes all barriers to trade among members and sets a common trade policy among non-members, against non-members. So that means, like we said for the free trade area, within the grouping, there's no barriers, there's free trade. But when it comes to dealing and trading with people or countries outside the grouping, then all the countries of the grouping have a common trade policy. So that means if you're in a grouping that's a customs union and you're trying to deal with, say, the USA, which is outside your grouping, and you have a particular product and the tariff level is 5%, then every single country in that grouping must charge 5%. Okay, so that is the difference between a free trade area and a customs union. Okay, then you move up, remember cumulative, so you move up to common market. It includes everything in FTA, everything in customs union, plus something else. The something else in the common market is it removes the barriers to trade, which we mentioned, and it also removes barriers to labor and capital, the movement of labor and capital among members, and it sets a common trade policy against non-members. So the difference there is the movement of labor and capital. So whereas if in a free trade area or a customs union, basically it's talking about free trade of goods and free trade of services. But in a common market, it's also saying there's free movement of people. So the only real world organization or grouping that has got to that level already is the European Union. So you can see in the 28 countries of the European Union, for instance, if you are in the United Kingdom, in UK, and then you see people coming in from Poland and from Hungary and many other countries to the UK to take up jobs. And as long as they are a passport holder from any other European Union country, then they are free to move to any other country and find a job there and set up and live there, okay? So that is free movement of labor. And to be honest, that is one of the major reasons for Brexit, because it's got to the point where some people in the UK feel that their jobs are being taken by people coming from other European countries, but maybe poorer European Union countries, and are kind of taking their jobs. All right, so yes, so common market is free movement of labor and free movement of capital. Then the next level you get to is economic union. So removes barriers to trade, labor, capital, common trade policy, all the things from the previous levels, and plus it coordinates members' economic policies. So this is quite a broad one, but if you look again at the European Union, the main thing that it coordinates in terms of economic policies is the fact that they have a common currency, and they're working towards all the members of the European Union ultimately using the common currency. And of course, that common currency is the euro. All right. So one aspect of coordinating economic policies is the euro. Other things they have to work towards is having common tax policies, various other common economic policies. So they harmonize all the economic policies across all the countries in the grouping. Then you become an economic union. And then finally, the last one is the political union, coordinates all aspects of members' economic and political systems. So actually what that really means is that all the members literally remove all their borders and it just becomes one country. So in the real world, that's something that's not really possible. So the political union just kind of completes the theoretical model of regional integration. If you want to look at political union in a real world sense, then you have to go back in time, some years back or even hundreds of years back, and look at the United States as it is today. There used to be many separate colonies, and later on those colonies came together and formed the country of the United States. Same thing in Australia, same thing in other parts of the world, all right? But currently you don't see any particular place in the world where it's likely that separate sovereign countries are going to give up their own national sovereignty, merge together and become one country. So basically the fourth level, economic union, is about as far as we can expect any real world grouping to go, and that is what the European Union is working on now. If you talk about ASEAN and you talk about NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Area, then both of those are still at right down the bottom level, free trade area, okay? Effects of integration, potential benefits and potential drawbacks. What are some of the pros and cons? The first thing to say here on this slide is that you can see concepts such as trade creation, trade diversion, and trade deflection on this slide. These are specific concepts that you need to understand in a bit more detail. So we'll be going through those in a later slide. But in terms of what you can see on this slide, potential benefits, political cooperation. Obviously, if there's political cooperation among the governments of the grouping, then the grouping itself can work smoothly. For instance, I could be outside of ASEAN and I could be watching my TV in Australia or in UK or USA, and on comes a TV commercial for travel. And it doesn't just say, come to Singapore, visit the integrated resorts and go home again, or come to Thailand, do some shopping in Bangkok and go home. No, it's a cooperation between several countries. So it might show and say, come to Singapore, visit the integrated resorts and do something else, and then fly up to Malaysia, visit Taman Negara, the national park, and enjoy the rainforest, and then go up to Phuket in Thailand and spend some time on the beach relaxing, and then fly back to Singapore and do some shopping and complete your holiday and fly back home again. So you can see it's a cooperative effort among, in this case, at least 3 of the ASEAN countries. All right, so if you think about ASEAN as an example, then Singapore, we're very small. We are just maximum population of about 5 million. So how much influence can just 5 million people have on the world stage? But if we join together with the other 9 ASEAN countries, then the total population is 640 million people. So it becomes a much, much bigger grouping. And if we harmonize all our policies together, then it becomes like 10 countries speaking with one voice to the rest of the world. So definitely there's strength in numbers. So this is a major benefit of integrating together. Okay, so if you look at some of the drawbacks there, you can see shifts in employment and loss of sovereignty. Shifts of employment is largely that if you're previously a collection of separate countries, now once you integrate and you come together and you remove all the barriers to trade, then that will tend to shift employment patterns. For instance, before ASEAN came together, then there could be some manufacturing of simple low-tech products in Singapore. But once we integrate and remove all the barriers, then it makes much more sense for simple and low-tech cheap products to be manufactured in Cambodia or Vietnam or somewhere. It doesn't make sense for Singapore to be doing it because the average person in the population is more highly educated and is expecting a higher income because the cost of living is more expensive in Singapore. And to some extent, loss of sovereignty, that of course depends on what level of integration you're at. So if you're talking about just a free trade area, the lowest level, probably not much loss of sovereignty. If you move right up to the top to political union, then total loss of sovereignty. You literally remove your border and you come together as one country. And as you move up through the 5 levels, there's a little bit more loss of sovereignty, and then the next level a little bit more loss of sovereignty. Okay, but at the level we are in Singapore as part of ASEAN, we don't have to worry about loss of sovereignty yet.